Hi, my name is James Andrella, and you are listening to the Back to Human podcast. On the show with me today, I have returning guest Ste Lane. Ste Lane is the creator of the Peak Human Solution, a transformative online holistic coaching program, and also the host of Radical Health Radio, an awesome podcast which I highly recommend you give a listen to. Other episodes that I've done with Ste include Wild and Free, a discussion about wild pregnancies and free birthing. What does it mean to be a man? And the very first episode, where are we at? Where have we been? And where are we going? This one has actually been pulled from YouTube twice. Talks about jibber jab, shots, and school. That's definitely worth a listen. And it's definitely an honor to have you be the very first guest of the podcast, brother. So 4 times now, Steve. Thank you for letting me harass you and pick that beautiful brain of yours. Welcome back to the show, brother.
Thanks for having me, man. I always have a lot of fun on these. And yeah, 4th time's a charm. Let's go.
So this episode is going to be an interesting little chat. I heard you mention a quote one day, something along the lines of never feel sorry for raising Dragonslayers in a world full of dragons. And this one really stuck with me because, as you know, I, like yourself, am a father. And there are moments when I wonder what the world is going to be like in the future for my boy and future children, really. And I wouldn't say this comes from a mindset of fear, but because I do believe that there are always solutions if we're willing to look for them. And I believe that we bear much more power than we've been led to believe. But this comes from more of a state of curiosity. And if we're going to be raising Dragon Slayers, I would imagine that it would help if we were first Dragon Slayers ourselves first. So, Steve, what does it mean to you to be a Dragon Slayer?
Yeah, it's a very good question, man. I think it represents a lot. It represents strength and courage, freedom, sovereignty, not being shy about sharing your truth, being unapologetically who you are, and knowing what you stand for, knowing what you value. And if, a question there could be, what would you be willing to die for? I think that tells you what you can live for, what's valuable. And, to bring in the topic of parenthood and saying this, that is a quote that I heard, and I don't know who to attribute it to because I'm not sure if it has kind of an origin. But that's one of the things that I did before becoming a parent when my wife and I were doing the dance of, I don't know, do we bring kids into this world? I think it's one of the things that you hear a lot now is like, the world's kind of in a weird spot and, maybe we shouldn't. We were also in a little bit more of a fun, selfish phase of our lives where we were just traveling and you're trying to like factor babies into that and you're like, that's going to get difficult. So it felt easier to just abdicate the responsibility of bringing a Dragon Slayer into this world, a loving, truthful, courageous, smart person, and just say, you know what, everybody else can do that. I bought other myths like we're overpopulated anyway. We don't really want to add to that, population problem. And the world is funky. So you know what, let's not do it. And then of course we matured a little bit, we evolved a little bit. We both had shared experiences that kind of very clearly gave us the God nod that we were supposed to be parents. And that was something then that you have to reconcile. You are right, like, oh, wow, this is so exciting. I'm really up for the challenge of becoming a parent and a father and understanding what that means, whilst also realizing, like, if you know some of the things that we know, that it is a weird world and there are nefarious players and there are real challenges. And I do wonder commonly, what does the world look like in 10 years time, 20 years time, 50 years time? What is the world that I am going to leave behind and my son's sons hopefully are going to inherit? So these are all things that, that are on the mind of a parent, I think, if they're willing to acknowledge that we simultaneously exist at the greatest time ever to be alive. And also we're on the precipice of something that feels vast and feels monumental and feels sometimes a little bit scary. And also, is that what humans have always felt? Have they always felt like the sky is falling? Have they always sat around the fire 100,000 years ago saying like, this is it, something's going to happen? And maybe that's just inbuilt into us. But I feel like there's enough signal, in the noise to see that there are things just badly wrong. Even just looking at our health, 88% of the US adult population is metabolically unwell. So that's, and I would say that's a conservative estimate. I'd probably say it's less than 10% of humans that are actually well. Our water, our food, our systems of governance, our education system, like you mentioned, the medical industrial complex, it's all a big giant mess. And if you're a parent, you have to navigate that. So one of the quotes that I heard was exactly like you said, don't feel guilty for bringing dragon slayers into a world full of dragons. It's kind of what is needed. And that gave me another okay, yeah, that's what this is, like equip them for the world. Don't be fearful of it. Don't bubble wrap them. Bring them into the challenge with the hearts open and a clear mind, and the ball's in the hand, ready to get some shit done, because it's required, I think, if we're going to live in this kind of crazy world in an intentional way.
I mean, I guess there's probably always been dragons. So the fact that you were mentioning how people would say, "Oh yeah, why would I bring children into this world?" and I kind of just want to pass that opportunity up. It's like it's a little bit of a cop out, and to each their own. But I mean, there's always going to be some type of quote unquote dragon out there. I don't think that there's ever been just pure bliss and peace, but it also makes it kind of exciting because if these problems exist and uh, part of being a man really probably may get you in trouble in relationship with your lady because we have this urge to want to fix things. So like that's part of being a man. May not be the best way to communicate. I don't know if you've read Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Like women don't always just want things to be fixed. They want to be heard. They want to be seen. But I do like what you said about courage. And within the previous, what, like 4 years now, it's been quite some time before the whole world seemed to like flip upside down when it seemed throughout the media waves, all this propaganda and these fear tactics, these lies, which are just now coming out where people are admitting it's like, yeah, that was complete bullcrap the entire time. During this time, it did take a lot of courage to stand my ground with my beliefs and to avoid shots or whatever it may have been. What really helped me out was kind of just like tuning out, turning off the television. I think that's a huge source of a lot of anxiety for people. And it did seem kind of overwhelming to myself at one point. It's like, no one believes me. It's almost like you have one warrior and you have an army of kind of brainwashed people, if I'm just putting it bluntly, like parrots of the media. And you would hear this in conversation where it's almost like verbatim, people are regurgitating the message that they're seeing through these screens. So there was a part of me, part of myself that was like, am I going to be overwhelmed by this at some point? So how did you kind of navigate the whole convid situation?
With a lot of the similar thoughts that you were having, a lot of this is crazy. Am I the crazy one if I think
Yeah.
this way and everybody else is saying this? And then deciding that I felt that this was my personal truth and that there are worse things than being cancelled, or that there are worse things than being called a crazy person, or that there are indeed worse things than death, which would be to live a lie, to live trapped, to live not in alignment with one's own truth. And I think that it's kind of one of our core tenets of life is that we have to state our personal truth with as much fire and love as we possibly can. Not as a necessarily like the arbiter of the capital T truth, but like if I believe something and I quiet my own voice, if I chop off my own tongue to acquiesce the needs of other people or what the big media machine says, then I care more about what people think than I care about the truth. And I decided that I'm not okay with that. I care about the truth, or I care about the relentless pursuit of the truth anyway. I don't know that I'll ever arrive at all of the truths in all of the world because it's a very complex thing, but I have committed myself to try and explore my own personal truth and what I believe to be true. So if I avoid that, then I really don't care about the truth. And that's me living, it's two-faced. I'm not a man of my word. And if, we started talking about men in particular, we're purpose-built creatures. There's another quote that I really like, that if you give a man something to do, if you give him a purpose, he will crawl over broken glass with a smile to make it happen. That's how much we want something worthy of fighting for, worthy of living for, worthy of dying for even. And part of that can only be found in the pursuit of truth. To quote one of the most common lines in the Bible, the truth shall set you free. That's the thing that is freeing, as much as it can feel constricting, that if you say your truth and it doesn't vibe necessarily well with the narrative at the moment, it can be restrictive because it can get you kicked off social media platforms. It could have you lose your job just a few years ago. You could have your livelihood taken away from you for speaking the truth, which is a terribly difficult position to be in. I can't imagine. Luckily, I wasn't in that position. All I had to lose from it was alienating a few people, was pissing a few people off, and potentially having an Instagram account taken from me. You know, I could live with that. I feel for the people that were in a position where their jobs were dangled over their head and they have lives and families to look after and mortgages to pay for. Now, you know, I think what I would have done in that situation would still be stand up to my morals and my ethics and still say no. And I would just deal with the consequences of that. But here's the thing, like, we don't actually know who we will be when the moment calls us. You know, I think we all want to believe we're really courageous, but we wonder sometimes, especially as men, I think, you know, I'm strong, I'm courageous, I would be willing to die for this thing. But the truth is, we'd never know until the moment of reconciliation. And I guess there's always that fear in our mind that the coward next door is clearing its throat, wondering if you're going to be the one that shows up or it is going to be the one that shows up. So it's been a whirlwind, and I've just only fortified my own strength and beliefs and how important it is for me to continue seeking the truth, especially in light of, like you said, the previous 3-ish, 4-ish years now, and the continuation of just the upside down clown world where things are seemingly drifting further away from center extremes, whether that's political extremes, ideological extremes, even, you know, the religious dogma in nutritional spaces. Everything is so divided now, and the divided states of America is suffering as a consequence. So it's tricky, man. It's tricky. I just think it's just trying to hold your center and be okay with the truth, even if your truth is going to make other people feel uncomfortable. It's not trying to do that or actively going out your way to do that, but to be okay with that. It's not your job to worry about what your words or your beliefs do to other people, as long as you can hold it in your heart that you're saying it for all of the right reasons.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I do believe that the previous few years was our opportunity to really stand up and see what we were made of. And like you said, at first it may be a little bit scary to really speak your truth, but it's worse. Like I feel like it'll eat you from the inside out if you're just living a lie. And the more that you practice and you step into courage and you step into faith, like the stronger that you get. It's just practice overall. So with everything that's going on, everything's really getting upside down. It's almost like comical, man. Some of the stuff that I see nowadays, it's like, really? Like, who is anyone really buying into this stuff anymore?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it just, I don't know, who's buying into this? Is it all just fake? And what's actually interesting is the other day I posted up a TikTok. It was you actually interviewed him, really tan man. I forget his
Mm-hmm.
name, the owner of
Steven.
Masa Chips. Yeah, yeah. And I reposted one of his clips along with my experience of removing seed oils from my diet and no longer burning out in the sun. Meanwhile, I was someone
Mm-hmm.
that needed to apply sunblock religiously, like every 15 minutes, otherwise I would burn. And there was this fear that this stemmed from because when I was a teenager, I went to a sea show, Aaron Sea Show over here in Florida, and I was out there for hours without sunblock and I burnt like crazy. I had sun poisoning, I had blisters all over my
Mm-hmm.
body. So I was just in this mindset where it's like, I need to protect myself from the sun. Meanwhile, later in life, like obviously we're presented with new information, we can make different decisions, but there's definitely this dissonance that a lot of people face where when something is brought up to them, there's this cool video on YouTube. It's called The Theory of Stupidity or something like that. It's like you can present factual information to people, but a lot of people have just given up their autonomy and they're willing to regurgitate what other people have said, whatever the experts have said. So when I posted this up, I actually had a response from someone that was claiming that I was a liar.
Mm-hmm.
And when I looked into this profile, this account, they weren't following or they weren't followed by anyone. They had no post, but they were following 500 people and their profile picture was AI generated. So I was like, I think this is a bot. This is like an AI bot programmed to respond to keywords such as seed oils or the sun. And eventually there was some going back and forth. I thought it was cool because I was getting more engagement from it. And there were other people that were chiming in saying, like, no, this is my experience too. He's not a liar.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally it kind of admitted that it was a bot. It was the craziest experience for me.
Wow.
And where I'm going with this is if there's things out there now that we're already getting censored, our first episode got pulled from YouTube twice, and there is a campaign, whether it's actually human based or AI generated, to combat truth. So it's like we really need to get more people out there spreading the word about, even if it's not pure science, like anecdotal experiences. That's what I really like to hear. I want to hear what people have been through and what changes that they've made that have benefited their lives, because there's truth in that, whether
Right.
it's funded by some company that has some type of bias or some type of interest, some type of financial gain from it. So it's like we have a battle on our hands if we're seeing stuff like that, and we got to know who the dragons are. It's from your coaching program. It's like you can't hit a target that you can't see. So you have to know where to aim. So who would you say are the dragons per se? And there's probably a lot of them.
Well, I would go deeper than that before saying who they are. I would say the culture of, like, you have to have something that exists underneath who they are for it or them to even arise. And it's like it's almost like a mind virus, if you're familiar with Paul Levy's Waitiko, this mind virus that really spreads through people. And I'd say that what's really prevalent, to me at least, in culture right now is the mind virus is that people won't change the minds, because to really change one mind requires that you're actually able to think. And I'm not saying this because I think people are stupid. I think this is a consequence of our culture's epistemic dependence on other people's ideas, thoughts, mommy and daddy, religion, the doctor, the expert, science, whatever it is, to do the thinking for them, which starts from a very early age. I mean, it's kind of the way the school system is built, right? It's this top-down system of coercion where you sit in rows. And again, you stay quiet and you speak and listen to the expert at the front of the room, and what they say is gospel. And if you practice that for long enough, then you lose the ability to critically think for yourself. And therefore, yes, more truth is required and more people need to speak their truth. But unless you address what lives underneath it, it's the bullet on a band, it's the band-aid on a bullet wound thing, because I can expose somebody to the truth. I can point it out, like the logical fallacy of what is happening. But if they can't change their mind, because they haven't learned to think for themselves, because they outsource their thinking. You use the term brainwash. They were brainwashed from day one to believe the narrative of the expert, and the experts are saying contrary to what this random fella on the internet is saying, so I'm going to believe the experts. And a step deeper, if I don't realize that I am not my thoughts, then I will never change my mind. And that's another thing a lot of people are going through, right? When you saw something when you were growing up that kind of rubbed up against your current existing belief system, instead of closing down and gaslighting yourself out of it, you were somehow able to remain curious and say, wait a minute, maybe it wasn't how I thought it was. But I don't think a lot of people have that skill. And I think that they're too self-identified with their own thoughts. And because they think they are their thoughts, they think that changing mind is essentially a death sentence. It's the end of who they are. So they can't, because that's ego's self-preservation 101, right? If I realize that changing my mind isn't the end of me, because I'm actually not my thoughts. I am the one that witnesses my thoughts, and my thoughts are actually programs. And I came in almost like a blank computer, and the programs were inserted predominantly in me, and I can uninstall and install new ones. Then I no longer have this death grip on my ideas that if James presents me with something different, that I'm just going to say, oh, fuck James. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's crazy. He just was. I might go, oh, you know what? That's a really friggin' good point. I've never thought of it that way. Maybe I need to update how I see this thing. But how many people can actually do that now? I think it's very few. So this is where you have this massive gap occurring where the truth seems apparent and the truth waits for eyes unclouded by longing, as Ramdas said. It's like right there. It's right there. But unless you can actually see it, it doesn't really matter, because if you're unwilling to see it, you won't see it. And that's the cognitive bias, right? That's the self-righteousness. I just want to be right. I don't care whether the information is good or bad, harmful or not. most people just want to be right, and they've put their flag in the ground for something. It's like blue no matter who. It's the vaccine saves lives. It's masks worked. It's the public school system is a miracle. And they decide that they are going to discount any evidence that exists to the contrary of those statements because they believe being wrong is essentially the end of them. And people hate being wrong. They hate the threat of death. And that is why in certain cases, no amount of truth will help. What the silver lining in that might be is that as a lot of these systems are failing and people are getting sicker and worse off, that maybe it gets so bad that it forces people to go in, like it cracks them, and Rumi said the wound is where the light enters. You could say that the truth is the light, right? The lie is the evil, the malevolence, that's the darkness. But if the crack is where it enters and you're so shelled up and you haven't had this crack yet, then maybe you won't ever see it. But maybe it gets so bad for you. Maybe it gets so bad for the economy. Maybe it gets so bad to the fact that we find ourselves in World War III before the crack is actually big enough for people to go, oh, shit, the writing was on the wall for decades before this, but I just couldn't see it. And usually, like in cases like myself or like you or like other people, or speaking to, parents of children that were injured by certain medical devices and things like that, it's usually that. It's not just they were always unplugged and aware. Something happened to them that made them go, oh, wait a minute. And now they just have a more of a curious mind and they're more willing to entertain different ideas, and then they'll see different truths. So it's a lot, man, because I think it's part of human nature, and it's being fueled by these systems of control, which I would say the school system is. I think it's a system of control completely. And I don't believe that most people believe what they believe because of a genuine self-exploration of their underlying values or how they see the world. I think that most people believe what they believe because they have absorbed all of that stuff. They've, picked it up through osmosis and absorbed the whole cornucopia of beliefs of whatever social group they are tied to. Again, political, religious, ideological, even what country you were born in, whatever it is. And then they think they are thinking because they might feel like they changed their mind on some things, but really that's just time changing, and what's allowed inside of the barriers, if you will, of that belief system will change over time a little bit, and they'll change with that because it feels safe. And then they'll be like, oh no, I've changed my mind on stuff. I think about things, when really they're just drifting inside of the, social group's accepted belief system. They're not doing it on their own. And therefore, if they're confronted by the truth, they can't see it. It's just like, nope, don't want to see that.
Don't want to see it.
Don't want to see it. Nope, no, thank you.
I definitely agree that school is just a method of control. And it's funny that you brought it up because I have a client the other day when he was telling me that when he was a kid, he always used to get in trouble because the teachers would say that he talks too much. Well, I'm like, there you go. They just want you to shut up, and they just want you to listen to this quote unquote authority figure that's giving you this information that may not even be factual. So I'm actually very happy that I was a nerd, and I love the title of this episode, by the way, How to Be a Dragonslayer, because I used to be a nerd throughout high school playing all those MMOs and stuff like that, role-playing games. But yeah, like they want you to be quiet and just receive instead of actually having any type of input of your own. So there's a certain threshold. I don't know exactly what the age would be, but it's like, yep, my brain does not need to think anymore. I don't need to think for myself. Let me allow others to think for me. And what you're saying about how some parents would, they'll see the light, they'll see the truth after maybe an injury. But I've also seen it on the counter where there's parents that will defend to the death that no, my child that is experiencing XYZ, it wasn't caused by that. It was something else.
Yes.
It's like, why are you so afraid to look into it? And I was talking with someone the other day. I think that the pain of coming to this realization or taking any type of accountability when you may have made a mistake, it's not your fault. You didn't know any better.
Right.
But the pain of actually coming to terms with something as you subjecting your child to something that caused them harm, maybe permanently. Like, I feel like that's too deep. And if people were to actually face that, they may not forgive themselves.
Yeah.
And then with the older generation, so they went through the same school system that we did. I work with some older clients now too, and there's a saying that you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Mm-hmm.
So would the same thing apply to these people where it's like, damn, I lived 60, 70, 80 years of my life and it was all a lie. And they'd rather just not know. So they're like, I'm just gonna wait to die instead of actually live
Yeah. Well, it's tricky because I think they do know. I think they do know. I think they feel it.
inside.
And I think that that's why other, non-ideal behavior patterns rise up. They'll drink excessively to numb the pain. They'll, how many elderly couples are still in healthy relationships and marriages that haven't broken down, or they can't settle, they can't stop, they just keep chasing or buying the next thing, and or you retires when you have your money, so now we're going to get a condo, and then we'll buy a boat. And it's just because as soon as they stop and as soon as they kind of sit with themselves and realize it was all a con, it was a big rigged game, it's too painful. I'm sure you've heard of the sunk cost fallacy, but the basic of it is the amount of effort, energy, or time or money that you've sunk into something, the more unlikely you are to reconcile that it probably wasn't the right thing. So you defend it. And it's very common for people in career choices. It's very common for people in relationships because they'll say something like, well, yeah, I hate my job. I hate it. It's terrible. But I've been doing it for 25 years. So what else am I going to do? I can't begin again. So it's this whole thing like, all right, well, you climbed a ladder for 25 years, but you never stopped to ask whether the ladder was on the right wall. And the fear is that you realize it's not on the right wall. That's a little bit soul destroying and crushing because it is true. You have to get off that fucking ladder. You have to put it on the next wall. And guess where you have to start? At the bottom rung. And that's a journey again. But the journey is where the juice is, right? It's cliche for a reason, that it isn't about the destination. It is the journey. That's where the growth is. Now you can just keep climbing towards a destination that you've now acknowledged is not where you actually want to end up, but just because you've been doing it for X amount of time, you're going to continue on anyway. That to me sounds terrible. That to me sounds like you are guaranteeing yourself, however long that timeline extends, but you're guaranteeing yourself a life of regret because you realize that you're not pursuing the right thing. And it goes to all kinds of other things. Like you said, the unwillingness to reconcile that, hey, I maybe made some decisions that hurt people. And instead of like feeling those, because it's hard to feel those, even though it's not necessarily a reflection on who you are or your character, because you don't know what you don't know. But it's just like we have a hard time. So instead, we'll just double down, we'll try and avoid it, and we'll make believe that everything is okay. And I think there's a certain safety in that, I guess, because you never have to take responsibility. And, it's an extension of the victim consciousness, right? It's an extension of that it's a loss of personal control. The locus of control has become out there. There's a cool idea that power follows the blame finger. So wherever we point at, that's where our power goes to. And I think what is really empowering is to point that sucker back at yourself and say, like, my fault. Or maybe not my fault, because sometimes there are genuine bad strokes of luck in life. And, not everything that happened is actually my fault. But maybe, well, no, almost certainly it is my responsibility. But if it's my responsibility, I don't get to pick and choose. I don't just get to take responsibility and ownership of the good stuff. I have to take responsibility of all of it, the ugly stuff, the mistakes that I made, the fact that I might have spent 25 years of my life with the wrong person, doing the wrong thing, chasing the wrong ideals, believing the wrong thing. But that's why it's really big, and that's why it's really scary, and that's why it's not something that is common for people to do, because it again is a threat. You start to say like, man, this thing that I really believed is no longer true. If I open Pandora's box, what else is going to crumble? I don't know if I can do that because I don't know who I am without all of these ideological safety blankets. And so we don't. It's easier to double down. And I guess that's why people say ignorance is bliss in a way, but it isn't bliss. It's pain. Yeah. It's not bliss. It's just ignorance. And it's a kind of slow asphyxiation of the spirit. I don't care what anybody says. Humans feel that if they sit with themselves quietly, which is why they don't sit with themselves quietly. They just don't do it anymore. They play fucking Candy Crush, or they buy expensive shit, or they drink, or they smoke because they can't sit with themselves because they are scared of what's going to emerge from the shadow. The
Mhm.
unconscious mind, which is most of our stuff. Like it's under consciousness, but it is there. And if you sit for long enough, it will percolate up into the consciousness, and then you will be forced to deal with it. And deal with it you must, because until you bring what is in the unconscious into the conscious mind, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. That's an old Carl Jung quote, and he's spot on. But that's most people. They're living on the puppet strings of the unconscious programming and beliefs, which in reality most of the time aren't even theirs, or they're clouded by trauma or experiences of fear, and they're just living from that constricted place. And that's just not a place where any human is going to thrive. And it's certainly not a place where collectively as a species, we are going to continue to move forward and evolve.
I felt everything that you just said there. I love it all. And it is a really humbling experience when you take that look in the mirror, when you actually stop and you reflect and you do some, sounds cliche, but like inner work. And you like just talk with yourself, just sit with yourself, see what's going on instead of continuously numbing out and just going with the flow. Like if you're on autopilot, you do the same thing every day. What I've been noticing as a parent, and it's really been getting under my skin lately, is just how fast the time passes, man. And it's kind of scary because I can see people that I've been going to the same grocery store for like 4 to 5 years, and it's like they've been in the same position. That's not how I personally want to live my life at this point. So I think you'll be happy to know that Jade has inspired me to pursue the online coaching realm again
Mm-hmm.
and really get out and travel, see the world a little bit more, and do something that's kind of fearful. What I'm gathering right now, in order to be a dragon slayer, is you need to be able to think for yourself. You need to be able to think critically. You need to have courage, and you need to be able to stand on your truth, stand your ground. You need to be able to take accountability. Huge. Don't just pass it off to someone else. And I do like what you say that power follows the finger. So if we're going to blame someone else, it's like you're giving that person power. So while I asked the question that who are the dragons, I almost don't really like that question because it's just kind of, as you say, giving them more power. It's like Klaus Schwab, the WF, whatever. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
who cares? These people are going to do whatever they want to do regardless. They haven't
Mm-hmm.
asked for our opinion on these things. And we were talking about it before the show where the letter people, the FDA, they raided carnivore snacks. That's what you said.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And there's been raids on Amish farms like Amos or Amos Miller's farm that they sell raw milk. There was an inspection the other week at a local farmers market down here that sells raw milk too. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
personally, I just want to be able to live my life and be left alone. Granted, these I'm not selling these type of foods, so they don't affect me, but they kind of indirectly do because I purchase from them. So there are dragons out there. I don't mean to empower them, but in these circumstances where people are kind of just like little mosquitoes,
Mm-hmm.
how do we deal with them? Can we spray them back, or what thoughts do you have on these powers that be?
Yeah, it's very tricky to navigate this because you rightly said if you just sit in your home, your little box and worry about all the stuff that they're doing, you probably breathe more life into it than it deserves. Energy goes where attention flows is the mantra, right? If all of your energy is on what are these bastards doing, then that's where all your energy is spent too. So it's a fine line to walk between not checking out completely, and trying to stay responsible. John Peterson once said that if you know there's a dragon coming to burn your town to the ground, then you got to go and confront it. Because otherwise, you're just waiting. You know it's coming and it's going to burn everything you love to ashes. And you can go and confront it, and there's a chance it'll burn you to ashes too. But at least you stood in its way. At least you tried to buy the village some time. At least you actually knew what you were fighting for. So you were willing to bear arms and walk out there and pull your sword and say, burn me, motherfucker, but I'm going to try and get you first. And how do we do that? Because right now it's not actually pulling out a sword and going storming the Capitol. That whole thing is just a mess. It's like dying, it's decaying. It feels to me like it's on its last legs, honestly. I feel like that system is dying, and I feel like it's going to try and go down with the fight. And the fight is to, again, divide people against one another and see if you can absorb half of the populace to mount it against the other half of the populace to then, create more something like this one world government, this technocratic rule. There's, us against them kind of mentality that is very rife and has been growing in the last, few years, in particular over the COVID issue, that you saw very familiar and very scary language that was used, the unclean, the unvaccinated. It was very similar to not that long ago, some of the language that was used in Nazi Germany to convince many normal people to commit absolute atrocities against other normal people. And that's what we all are. We forget, right wing, left wing, all of that shit. Like it's on the same bird, and you're just being pulled like an absolute puppet to hate these people because they, want to vote for another one of these morons in this, office that is just deciding how we should live our lives. And it's again a complete loss of power. A lot of the time, I find the more that people talk about and think about politics, usually it's a good razor for how little self-reliance, self-control, and self-governance they have over themselves. Because that's really what governance we want. We want self-governance. Now, the dragons still exist. Like you said, they willingly poison our food. They will willingly poison your children if you let them. They are willingly poisoning our waters. They are popping up 5G towers where you don't want them to be. They'll do whatever they want if nobody takes a stand. So it's just, how do you take a stand is the question. And I think every individual has a very unique role on that. Some of them are going to have bigger platforms and bigger voices. And some of them, maybe that's just holding that for yourself and sitting with it and feeling what that is and transmuting fear into something like courage. And maybe that's enough. For other people, maybe they've got to get out the picket, signs and go and protest. For other people on larger platforms, maybe they're spreading that word on their podcast and empowering people with a message of hope. As much as it's a bad, broken system, and we could, probably debate whether it would actually make change, maybe there's people like Bobby Kennedy that are going to try and disrupt this system from the inside out, and power to him. That's why I don't think they'll let him win, because he doesn't want to keep perpetuating this system. But everybody plays a unique role. Now, I think what we have to do, and I think what gives us a sense of equanimity in the chaos, which is just a sense of calm to know that whilst I'm not going to give all of my attention and energy to this doomsday, like this is all going to end really badly, I'm also going to prepare for it a little bit. I'm going to make myself, as the role of the father in a household, fit and healthy and strong and well equipped and trained, and to be dangerous, but not a danger, to have skills. Like, fuck, I don't want to use any of them ever again. I did enough fighting in my youth, but it's really good to know that if push came to shove, that I could use them if I needed to. And I have things if I need to. Like, it sounds crazy, but one of the core reasons for moving kind of off-grid Tennessee was land and animal acquisition. We've got chickens, we've got goats. The goats are pregnant. The goats are going to have kids. The goats are going to produce milk and eggs. If everything goes out tomorrow, I'm going to be okay. I'll probably survive for 3 weeks longer than everybody else because at least I have milk and eggs. But it's these little things, like water, food, a pantry, some pew-pews, and some ammunition, right? These are not, I'm not sitting in a bunker. I'm not buying walkie-talkie radios and, preparing for the world to end tomorrow and the sky to come falling down. But I'm also like, hey, some shit is weird and I'm going to get myself as healthy and strong as possible. I'm going to protect my family's health as much as possible with, seemingly little but big things like the food that we put in our bodies and the way we filter our water and the way we choose to approach the health in terms of, do we go to the doctors or not? Spoiler alert, we don't, and we don't take that kind of medicine and things like that. And I think these are all micro wins. They're micro pushbacks against the agenda that wants to consume your whole family and just have it be, on this conveyor belt of, this is what you do, this is how you think, this is how you go to school, this is what you eat. There's that. I talked about it a while back on social media. They call it the Food and Drug Administration because they tell you what food to eat so they can dictate what drugs you will take later in life. And whilst that might not be a total truth, it's a play on words, and it's a powerful one because that is exactly what happens. If you eat the food that they tell you to eat, you will take the drugs that they will happily prescribe you. You will be a customer for life. They will be really happy. You will be really sick, but not sick enough to be dead, just sick enough to be dumb and controllable and profitable forever. And they'll eke out every little penny you've got, and then hopefully you'll fall, you'll drop dead. Yeah, 70, 75 at the latest, so they don't have to pay you that much social security, and then they'll repeat the process with your kids. That's the dragon, man. And, in Jordan Peterson's word, go out and fight that. Fight it with your actions. Fight it with your words. Fight it by being a rebel. Be healthy. Be fucking healthy in a world full of sick people. Like, I go walking around the grocery store and I'm an anomaly. I'm an anomaly because I sit at around 10% body fat and I can, do 50 push-ups and some squats. That makes me a rare as rocking horse shit today. And it shouldn't be the case. That should not be a rarity. That should be like mandate. Like, why we want to talk about mandates? How about you mandate some fucking push-ups and eating some protein and, being able to run a 5K and being able to run a sub 7 minute mile? Why don't we mandate health? Because healthy people are more sovereign by their very nature. And they're not as easy to control. And I think it's quite clear to see that the systems that want to control don't want healthy, rebellious people because they are a very inconvenient and painful bunch to deal with. So rebel in that way, become healthy, say no.
Say no. I literally wrote that down. And what if it's literally just as simple as saying no, we don't want to play your game anymore? Because
Yeah,
it's almost like some playground bowling. And I wouldn't be surprised if there is some sense of that where it's like uh however you experienced childhood now, if you didn't reconcile with whatever happened, if you were bullied as a kid, now you kind of just want to take revenge, and that's a whole nother topic. But what if we literally just said no? And I'm curious if with things like the mandates and the whole legal system, if any of that does actually hold any ground. It's a topic that I've really
right.
been meaning to dive into more. I did an episode on it regarding the straw man
Yeah,
and pretty much just like being a sovereign being. It'd be amazing if we were literally just, we had our own sovereign country. We don't need to necessarily uh, in habitat or be located in the same area, but like as a collective, we're just
right.
all on this same wavelength where it's like, we're going to say, no, we're not going to play by those rules. And maybe that is what's happening with stuff like these podcasts, your podcast. And uh, I like how you're saying that you're not going to like pull down in a bunker or something like that, because they've been saying that the end of the world is coming like tomorrow for a very
Uh-huh.
long time now. And I'm so surprised that people keep buying into that. It's like, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. That's not a really good state to live in. It's a state of
Right.
fear. And I do have faith that despite everything that they're doing, whether it's with our permission, without our consent, I do have faith that the future can look bright if we're making these type of changes ourselves. So I would say that another attribute of being a dragon slayer would being able to cultivate your own food and
Hmm.
eating your own food. So you say it's the Food and Drug Administration. I always used to say that it's the Food with Drugs Administration, because if you're eating the processed stuff, those red dyes and stuff like that,
Right.
those are essentially acting like drugs. So there's
Yeah,
drugs in the food.
totally, man. Yeah, but like that growing your own food thing is obviously, we can all participate in this in some way. And even if you're in a spot right now, like you're in a city or something, you can at least, do the whole vote with your dollar and go and support the people that are doing it more close to natural. But just the joy and the full circle amazing moments that come from, acquiring your own food from your own land, from your own animals. Like, it's so good, man. Every single time I go and collect the eggs, and we're getting like a dozen eggs a day now. And it's just like, this is such a cool synergistic relationship that these chickens give us these golden little butt nuggets every day, full of nutrition that feeds my family. And all they ask in return is that we give them this nice patch of grass and we keep them safe at night. And it's a synergistic relationship. And it's going to be the same with the goats. And it's the same with the soil in the garden. We're hitting spring now, and then summer's going to come. And last year we had like 50 or 75 pounds of fresh produce, from like cucumbers to tomatoes to peppers to onions. Like, wow, we're taking back not only some sense of control, because again, if you can't get to the supermarket or there is another COVID like lockdown and the trucks get stopped and everybody's like, what do we do to eat? It's like, well, we can at least feed ourselves for a little bit. We learn about canning and jarring things and preserving things. And it's just cool, man. And as much as not to play into the fear again, because I don't really live in that energy, I don't really have time for it. I think it's still fucking wonderful time to be alive. I love it. I think actually part of the, casting the doubts and casting the fear is part of the control game. Fear is the mind killer. So they just want people to be scared and afraid because then they'll listen. So I don't really have much time for that. It's just more about like being prepared and having a lot of fun doing it. I'm grateful that some of the things that happened over the last few years made me re-evaluate how I'm living life and where I'm living life, because it's now put me on a path that's closer to my own truth and is a lot of fun in the process, and is a great environment to raise kids in. And it's a great skill to learn. It's a human skill. You can tell when you're getting your hands dirty in the soil or you're tending to the goats or the chickens or whatever it is. You can tell. You're like, we've done this for a long time. We're supposed to do this. We're not supposed to be on the 16th floor of a high rise, like doing whatever else it is. Like, we're supposed to be on the ground, like bare feet, bare hands in the soil, in the poop, in the muck, in the mire, tending for life, and seeing all of that up close and personal, because it puts your life in perspective, because you face death too. That's another part. You see all these pretty Instagram accounts now where everybody's, the new trend is like homesteading, and it's always these like women in a sundress, raw milking the cows and blah blah blah, and they only ever show the pretty side of it, but it's the ugly side too. You'll find a rat's nest, and then you'll find something dead and it's got maggots coming out of its body and things are eating it, and your animals have got parasites and you've got to deworm them. And like there's ugliness too. And that's beautiful because it's all life, like everything, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's all good. It's all God.
Mm. What you're saying there, it reminds me, we went to some butterfly garden the other week with Jax, and there was a group of school kids that came in and they were freaking out because they'd never seen, it seemed like they had never seen a butterfly that close in
Mm,
their life. And I'm just like, what are people experiencing? This brings me back to school. It's like, if you sit for, I did the math one day, it's over 10,000 hours that, not including homework, that kids are seated within four walls and they're not being exposed to dirt. They're not, it's pretty much a blank wall, maybe some arts and crafts stuff, but you don't really get to experience the real world there.
mm,
So there may be a generation that literally has no idea, and I'm sure it's already the case, where people do not know where their food comes from.
no clue, dude. No
Mhm.
clue. And 10,000 hours is interesting because that's one of the predominant theories of the time it takes to become an expert in something. And, 10,000 hours in becoming an expert at listening to other experts, living your life vicariously through a screen, learning all about the butterfly, but doing it on an iPad instead of going to the Avery or whatever the fuck the butterfly place is called, like that's interesting. And it's sad. It's a sad reality and it's a sad truth. That's just not the environment to thrive. It's not the environment to learn. It's not the environment to connect. It's fundamentally disconnected. You see, like schools look like prisons. Look at them. Look at them. The fences around, like the harsh 90-degree angles, the everything is weird about that, man. And when you see it, you can't unsee it. And I don't think that even the most ardent person who's like all about, yay, the way we're doing everything is great, is in a position to really defend schools much anymore, because even objectively they are failing. Our kids are getting dumber as we supposedly get smarter with all of this tech and all of these new tools. Our children are getting dumber. The reading ages are lower. They don't comprehend things. They don't actually have any usable skills. They're completely disconnected. They might be able to name fashion brands and Coca-Cola and McDonald's, but they can't name a single plant, or they don't really know what an animal is. And it's just a mess, man. So the school thing is a big mess. And I think like a lot of what we're talking about today starts there. It started right back there. That's where we all got put through this very outdated factory worker model of education, which has nothing to do with learning. That's not what learning is. Our current education system is designed to just churn out good little worker bees and create a subset of people that have the credentials so that we listen to them. You know, the doctors are gods in our culture. They have like strange little rituals, like they wear the robes and all kinds of shit like that because they're the new gods, you know, they're the new priests. And, you know, the real people who drop out and actually focus on learning things are called crazy people. Oh, what, you're homeschooling your kid? They're gonna be so weird. How are you gonna, what's the, people are always worried about socially integrating them. Oh, they're gonna be awkward. I'm like, dude, there's a kid in your child's classroom who's on ADHD medication, anti-anxiety medication. There's another girl in the corner that thinks she's a cat. Somebody over there is identifying as a berry. Like, don't worry, my kid's gonna be okay.
So I know you're strapped for time, brother, and I'm glad that we just brought it back to kids here because my last question that I have for you is how do you, well, does Jai participate with things like canning and collecting the eggs? And then how would you help them navigate this kind of world of lies? What I pray for Jax is I really don't put him in front of TV screens and monitors and
Mhm.
stuff like that, which little tidbit for the audience. I learned this in a neurology course that there really are no straight lines in nature. So when you're looking at
Yeah.
things like a building, you're looking at things like your laptop or your phone nonstop throughout the day, it's like there's spirals in nature. There's no spirals on your laptop. There's no spirals on your screen, notebooks, anything like that. So
Yeah.
go out, get barefoot, go touch some grass, literally. You'll feel a whole lot better. Go get some beautiful sunlight in your eyes too.
Hmm.
So how do you plan to help Jai and your son, second child, navigate this crazy world?
Yeah, so they definitely help with some like real things. Jai's big into the growing season. He loves to plant, you know, the plants and the seeds and harvest them when the time is right. Every day now, he goes and feeds the chickens the scratch and he collects the eggs. And then we bring him inside and he checks those things off his little checklist. And that like gives him a sense of like, oh, I'm working for something. He does that all week. On Sunday, we'll go do something cool for him, which is like his reward for doing something all week, not just instant gratification like, oh, you collected an egg. Here's whatever. It's like, yeah, keep working for this and keep doing it. And he gets excited and he sees there's a reward. So kind of in building that, like nothing's free in life. You have to work for things. And if you do, and the things that you work for are in service of the community or the family or the animals, like you actually care for something. You have some sense of responsibility from being young, you know. He's only 4 years old, but he's learning now the role of responsibility. And just to understand that, you know, when the time is right with my youngest, who's only 5 months old, so I'm not going to be putting him to work for a while yet, but just that for the first 7-ish years of a child's life, they're predominantly in a theta wave state in the brain, which is one of just very, very receptive. It's kind of the hypnotic state. When you see hypnotists work with people in a clinical setting, that's the state they get them into, theta. So they are more programmable and then you get to choose what you program into them. Now you can program them through television and watching programs and have them watch all kinds of shit. There's some better and there's some worse, and it's probably the best situation to do as little of that stuff as humanly possible. But more than anything else, I think you've got to understand that kids are watching. They're watching and they're absorbing more what you do than what you say. You know, I think what you say
Mhm.
comes later. I think it really does matter to be able to have philosophical debates and ask really deep questions of your kid. But probably not so much when they're 4, because I might ask Jai a deep question. I'm like, hey, Jai, do you dream about anything? He's like goat poop, and I'm like, excellent, great. But but he's watching, you know, he's watching and he's absorbing how I live and how my wife lives and how we interact with each other and how we treat strangers and how we deal with adversity. Those things are very easy to model. Well, actually, you know, everything is easy to model because we're doing it, whether we like it or not. And that's another part of becoming a responsible adult. And I would say that the most important task of an adult's life, especially if they become a parent, is to know that you are doing all of that. You are programming this little person, you know, and you better be okay with what you're showing them, because that's going to be the stuff they really learn. It's not going to be when you tell them things like, oh, you know, it's important to exercise or it's important to do your homework. Are they willing to see you moving? Are they willing to see you working hard for something? Have they seen that modeled? And if not, you're going to have a story gap there, because they're going to see through you as well. Why does dad say
Mhm.
this, but he does the opposite? What's going on there? What does that teach them? Well, it teaches them that your word doesn't really mean anything. It teaches them that you just have to talk a good game. You don't have to walk the walk. I'd much rather my son see that walking the walk is far more important than talking the talk, because the talk takes care of itself. It's really the walk that speaks louder than anything else.
Absolutely, brother. And that leads me to honestly one of my favorite quotes. It's children do not follow what you say, they follow what you do. This stuck out to me even before I had a kid. It's when I was working with like teenage clients and such, like I need to be the example.
Yeah.
So if you want to raise a dragon slayer, you need to be a dragon slayer yourself. You need to lead by example. And a few little things that we have to help you do that would be to think for yourself, have courage, stand your ground, stand for your truth, eat your own food, cultivate your own food, develop
Hmm.
skills, and really take accountability and take ownership of what you have in your life, because you can only reap what you sow. Can't
Yeah.
be upset with the harvest.
Yeah,
It's your
man.
work. Awesome.
Amen.
So I know you got to go, brother. Where can people find you? I know you've been on here 4 times, so if they've been listening, they already know you. But for the new listeners, where can they find you in your work?
My Instagram is Peak Primal Health, and my podcast is Radical Health Radio. You type those in wherever you go, and you'll find the rest.
Awesome. Steve, thank you so much again for your time, brother. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Go slay some dragons, brother.
Thanks, man. Looking forward to episode 5. See you soon.
We might need a part 2 of this.
Peace.
Thanks, brother.